Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'll go over the differences between raster images, vector graphics, smart object raster images, and smart object vector graphics. Alright, let's get started. I know I covered raster images and vector graphics in an early Illustrator tutorial, so I'll just briefly go over them again. A raster image is created from pixels, whereas a vector image is created from paths. So with a raster we have that certain amount of pixels. If we zoom in on this, you can see each one of these individual pixels is just its own color. So these little square colors, each one of those is a pixel. And so when we zoom out, each of those pixels makes up this image of my dog here. And so that's a raster image made up of pixels. If we scale this up bigger, we're not adding any extra pixels to it, so it's just going to stretch those and we're going to lose quality. Whereas with a vector graphic, we could scale up all we want and we can scale it down and we're not going to lose any quality because it's not made up of pixels. So you can take this little heart and scale it up to a 100-foot size poster and you won't lose any quality. And you can also scale it back down from that size and it'll look exactly the same. So to illustrate that, I'm just going to scale down this raster image and scale it back up and you'll see how we lose quality. And so to scale it, I'm going to go to Edit, Free Transform, or use Control-T or Command-T on a Mac. And so like with Illustrator, you have the option to rotate it, and you can grab the corner here and scale it. It's going to scale either way, unless we hold Shift, again like with Illustrator, and then that's going to constrain your edges so it scales evenly. Okay, so if we scale it all the way down to a nice small size, and we hit Enter to accept the changes, so what we did, we lost all of those pixels that were here. When you scale it down, it's going to cut out the pixels that it doesn't need. So if we zoom in on this, you can see it's made up of way less pixels now. And since it's so small, you can still tell what it is with fewer pixels. When we scale it back up though, we're not going to gain extra pixels. It doesn't remember what it had before. So it's just going to scale up the smaller image. I'm going to do Control-T and then scale this up, hit Enter, and you can see how the quality has changed. So we just scaled up those smaller pixels and we lose all of that quality. It doesn't remember what it had before. Okay, I'm just going to fit this on screen by going to View, Fit on Screen. Okay, so it's kind of hard to do your layout for your poster when you want to scale things down and scale them up and move them around and just do a little bit of experimenting to see what fits where. You want to be able to scale stuff and move it back up, but it's not great when you lose all of this quality. So that's when smart objects come into play. I'm just going to undo this to get back to the original photo. Okay, so we have the original raster image here. I'm going to take it and copy this. You can either right-click on the layer and do duplicate, or you can grab the layer and, like with Illustrator, drop it down to the new layer, and that's going to make a copy of it. So then I can just grab that and move it down. Okay, so now we have two raster images. What we want to do is convert this to a smart object raster, and you can do that by right-clicking on the Frankie copy, and then doing Convert to Smart Object. And when you right-click on it, don't right-click on the icon here because that will give you different options. And when you right-click on the layer name, you get other options as well. Okay, so now we have it as a smart object. So what that means is that you can scale it down and it's going to remember the original image, so you're not going to lose those pixels. Let me just illustrate that for you. Control-T. I'm going to scale this way down. Hit Enter, and now I'm just going to scale it back up. So unlike with our raster image, we could scale it down and back up, and since it's a smart object, it remembers the properties of the original photo. But just remember, this isn't like a vector object. We can't scale it up indefinitely because it's still not going to add extra pixels to it. We just don't have those pixels. So if we start scaling this up, the quality is going to start to go down. But with a smart object, you can scale it down all you want and bring it back up, and you won't lose that quality. So this is great when you're doing the layout of your poster because you might not be sure what size you want yet, so you're going to play around with different sizing, and you want to be able to scale it up and not have lost that quality. You might have to change these afterwards from smart objects to raster because some of the different filters and effects won't work on smart objects. So once you get a size you like, then you can convert it to a raster. And when you bring images into Photoshop, by default, they come in as smart objects, so you won't have to convert them to smart objects first. So to convert this back to a raster object, we can just right-click on it and then hit rasterize layer, and that's going to rasterize it. So now when we scale it down and back up, since it's a raster image now, we lose that quality. And I'm just going to undo that. So you're not going to normally deal with vector images in Photoshop. That's more for Illustrator. It does give us some options from Illustrator though, like we have our pen tool here, we have our selection arrows, and we also have our shapes here. And these are going to make paths. These will make vector images. So you don't have as many options as Illustrator though. So one way to work with vector images in Photoshop is alongside Illustrator. So to do that, we'll open up Illustrator. I have this little happy face here. We're going to select it, and then I'm going to hit Control C to copy it, and then go back to Photoshop and hit Control V and paste it. So we can paste from one program to the other. So here we can either paste it as a smart object, as pixels, that'll be like a raster image, as a path, which is like a normal vector image, or as a shape layer, which is also similar to a path. We're going to do a smart object and hit OK, and that's going to copy it in here. And we're just going to hit enter. So in Illustrator, I had all of these on separate layers and I could go in and color them. But in Photoshop, it just flattens it as one layer. So I can't change the color on it in here. But if you want to do that, you can just double click this icon here. And then it's going to open it in Illustrator here. And then we can change the colors if we want. And then once you do that, you just hit Control S to save it, and that's going to update it in Photoshop. So you can use the two programs side by side to be doing that. But normally you won't be using vector objects in Photoshop. But just in case, you have some basic ones here. But if you need to do more detailed work, you can use Photoshop and Illustrator together. Alright, that's going to cover it for this tutorial.